Hello, and the warmest welcomes galore to Season 2 of Look, Look and Look Again, and we are at episode 19, and soon, and on a sad note, yet another sensational series draws to a close. What started as a jolly jape to be shared with my dear friends such as Pete and Rach, and a soupçon of others has resulted in 40 subscribers and some lovely comments. I guess humans aren't that bad after all, as I share with you all things culty and hip. I simply adore each and every one of you for that. Thank you. Some of the viewing figures have been unbelievable, so whether you look and look again with me for 15 minutes, the whole duration of my show, or subscribe and get a tremor each time you were notified, knowing you were in for a thriller-second, fun-packed, fact-packed cavalcade of sleazy scrumptiousness or retro resplendence, I thank you. Right. Enough sycophantic shenanigans, let's cast our minds back to the very first programme of Season 1, and as you may recall, or not, I mentioned a show not covered by us in full, and it needs to be. I only mentioned it briefly, and it went something like this. So what happened to these colour firsts? The BBC wiped them, of course, out of 49 episodes of Out of the Unknown, that were made. Only 20 complete episodes exist in the archives, with only one complete colour example, The Last Lonely Man, and a 30-minute clip of another of the colour stories, The Little Black Bag. Ah, bless. Do you remember those times, those halcyon days? I do, because I had to construct it and put it all together. I've learnt so much with you at my side, dear viewer. Anyway, so it is with joie de vivre and unbridled enthusiasm, I bring you a review of the last word in a televisual, science fiction treasure trove of otherworldliness that is simply out of the unknown. On the 21st of April 1964, this sprang up. However, it was to a very shaky start.
Tonight of all nights, there has been a loss of electric power at our main studios, the television centre in West London. Excuse me, just like Channel 1. Hello? Unlike Channel 1, there's nobody there.
From 1965 to 1969, Sir David Attenborough was the fresh-faced channel controller in terms of programming, and the vision he had was more experimental and outré than its sister channel BBC One. 1965 saw Harold Wilson as Prime Minister, Winston Churchill puffed on his last cigar, the red velvet mini dress and all things quant were born, the post office tower opens, and that old hag Mary Whitehouse founded the National Viewers and Listeners Association against TV immorality. Oh, and ironically at the same time, Kenneth Tynan said the word fuck on a live TV broadcast, a filthy British TV first. With a firm eye on avant-garde programming, in October 1965, Out of the Unknown appeared in living rooms up and down Britain, and it really couldn't have found a more fitting hangout. Just how Out of the Unknown came to be is down to the skills and the talents of one woman, Ms. Irene Shubik. Here she is getting the Trieste International Science Fiction Award, and deservedly so. Shubik started out on the ITV network and was initially taken under the wing of TV producer Sidney Newman. Both of them worked on the pioneering drama anthology series Armchair Theatre for ABC Television, where Shubik was a story editor of the show. It was in 1962 that she conveyed several science fiction story shorts and got them adapted for the small screen under the Out of This World banner. Each episode was introduced by Boris Karloff. Sadly, only one episode of this series exists. If you think that's bad, wait till you see what happened to Out of the Unknown. Newman moved to the BBC to provide much-needed vigour to the channel, and Shubik soon followed. And as Newman took a young Verity Lambert under his tutelage, Shubik worked up the corporate ladder with her own skills combined with Newman's gift of education and guidance, becoming a producer in her own right. No mean feat for a woman in the mid-1960s, I would imagine, as apart from looking pretty, baking and breeding, there was little opportunity for any other credit for this important gender. Shubik was asked to put a science fiction anthology show together for the up-and-coming BBC Two channel. Shubik already had the savoir-dire of putting a decent anthology show together due to her work on Out of This World, and began networking where she met Edward Carnell, who at the time was a poignant figure concerning science fiction publishing, and he could advise Shubik on potential authors and stories that could be optional for dramatisation. Shubik also, from accounts, was a keen, ardent fan of science fiction as well, which motivated her passion even further. It seemed they had the right person for the right job, which led to Shubik's programme proposals for the fledgling channel. Shubik travelled to New York, where she commenced rights negotiations with some of the authors whom she felt would provide an ideal source material. It was here she met with Isaac Asimov, who after negotiation was given the green light to use two of his stories, The Dead Past and Sucker Bait, but with a caveat that they would only be screened in the UK and not worldwide. Shubik also approached some authors and asked for story ideas and scripts to use exclusively for the series. Authors such as Ray Bradbury, John Wyndham, J.G. Ballard, and Kate Wilhelm agreed to use their material, and so it would only be a matter of time before they would eventually see their visions beam into the living rooms up and down the country. After her entrepreneurism with all things Martian, Shubik began the production closely working with George Spenton Foster, who had been with the BBC since its foundations. He also had fervour concerning the science fiction genre, and the two of them got on very well, igniting their passions further about the subject matter and their visions for a new science fiction anthology series. Now, Spenton Foster, for those Doctor Who fans amongst you, was the chap who brought us some classic Who stories where he directed them, such as Image of the Fendal, the Ribos Operation, and also the programme Blake 7 stories. He did a few of those, but that's by the by, and over 10 years later he started directing those. But I digress anyway. So back to the Unknown, 12 scripts were eventually commissioned, 10 adapted from material already published, and 2 especially written for the show. Bernard Lodge, known for his iconic late John Pertwee, early Tom Baker opening and closing credits for Doctor Who, was used for the credits of the show, which accompanied
Norman
Kaye's composition of the theme. Kaye was also responsible for the incidental music for early Hartnell stories, such as The Sensorites and also Keys of Marinus, for Doctor Who, so was no stranger to the celestial, transcendental musical score needed for a science fiction programme. I won't bore you with comparisons every time, as we are talking Out of the Unknown and not Doctor Who, as there are plenty of programmes on YouTube and documentaries galore about this glorious programme, but it has to be said there are many links between the shows, and I feel it does have to be noted. 1965, in fact, was quite a golden year for science fiction and fantasy, which had already started a following which we now fondly recollect and refer to as cult television. Shows such as Doctor Who in its second year in 1965, Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Avengers, which started to dally even more with fantasy and science fiction than ever before, The Outer Limits, for example, and Jerry Anderson puppet shows like Thunderbirds began to encapsulate generations at this time. These not only gained viewers' interest, slaked the public's thirst for adventure, and stretched their imaginations, but this chimed quite nicely with the UK Prime Minister's white heat of technology speech. The future had finally arrived. The tinfoil spacesuits and plastic environments had been soldered together, and this was its zeitgeist. The majority of the shows mentioned would feature a Monster of the Week format, but Shubik, and possibly still under the influence by Newman, being his protege, refrained from this format and went for something a little more recondite with her vision. Dodging around creature features for the perception here was vastly more cerebral and thought-provoking teleplays which pushed intellectualism, set design, prescience, and directorial experimentation, in fact, to its apex, within the constraints of a BBC budget which was exiguous at the best of times. With some final adjustments made and the suggested introductions to the stories by Christopher Lee and Vincent Price vetoed, the first episode broadcast was No Place Like Earth by John Wyndham, based on combining two stories by Wyndham, Time to Rest and the titular episode name. This sees Terence Morgan and Hannah Gordon starring in a rather underwhelming opener about a nomadic handyman wayfaring the conduits of Mars who seems consumed by a fervent desire to return to Earth, which alas has been destroyed by a nuclear Armageddon. His only other option is to go to Venus as a viable second best, to see what it's like up there and see if it's like Earth. Here he discovers that the grass is not always greener on the other side, as a decision is needed to return to the idyllic but moderate existence of Mars, or remain on the newly found despotism of Venusian society. As an opener, the merits here are slight, with some smashing Martian landscapes, but really that's all, as it's a tad trifle dull, with the anti-separatist message all rather too conspicuous. Initially, each story was to be 75 minutes in length, which Shubik rebuked to a more friendly 60 to 65 minute duration, and in this story's case, that is most welcoming. After the debut opening episode got a mixed reaction from press and public alike, the next story, Alan Norse's The Counterfeit Man, raised the bar to tenacious heights. Based on an expedition returning back from Ganymede, the crew of a spacecraft unintentionally have an alien on board that takes the shapes of others. The ship's doctor is 100% convinced, but 99% of the crew are not. The clone is proving to be a perfect duplication of whoever it copies. Or does it? Featuring a very young David Hemmings, who steals the hour with regards to his performance, this is one of many jewels in the series' crown. how wonderfully surreal. Equally absorbing was Stranger in the Family that followed it, penned by David Compton, and ethereally directed by Alan Bridges. This sees Richard O'Callaghan, who had appeared and continued to play in many British films and television programmes of this era. You may remember him in some carry-on films like this and this. He plays the part of 18-year-old Boy. Boy is a mutation, a bit like an X-Man, with extraordinary powers of perception and the ability of mind control, making this a marketing dream. Cocooned by his parents in a tower block for fear of exploitation, Boy finds himself in the big wide world and falls for an aspiring actress come hooker. However, this proves to be a tragic situation as he ends up embroiled in a world what his parents had feared and shielded him from all this time. A nightmare unfolds. Stranger in the Family sports a superb cast and is so revolutionary for its time. With its concept about human evolution, this makes this story a winner and is rather akin to the Star Trek episode Charlie X made a year later. Isaac Asimov debuted with the story The Dead Past, featuring Mr. Upstairs Downstairs himself, the perfect gent, Mr. Richard Langton, and versatile actor James Maxwell. This is a thought-provoking but can be slightly dry yarn about time travel, but with a difference. In this story, time travel is recognised as being physically impossible, but a machine called the chronoscope is built for viewing the past. In a totalitarian society, all scientific research is controlled by the government, proving infuriating for a scientist who wants to prove that the Carthaginians weren't so bad after all. Sanctioned against this research and aided by a friend from the government, Professor Arnold Potterley steals blueprints for the chronoscope in order to build one of his own. But, as this is out of the unknown, it has unforeseen consequences. The ending is haunting and very sad, and Sylvia Coleridge is perfect, and her performance here is suitably touching. Now for one of my favourites, although they are all very, very good, William Tenn's Time in Advance, which was, I think, first published in Galaxy Science Fiction. It sees Edward Judd. Yes, him from The Day the Earth Caught Fire. I love this actor. What a treat. I love actors that are versatile. Anyway, he plays the main protagonist, Nick Crandall, who returns to Earth from a penal colony for time served. The twist here, and a unique, simple one, it is too, is that someone can serve time for a crime they are about to commit. Completely turns things on its head. So returning home after the harshest treatments for criminals on this penal colony, and with his friend Otto, played by Randall and Hopkirk's unfortunately named Mike Pratt, he finds people are not so welcoming, as anyone can be murdered by Crandall without any consequence of his action. Slowly, Crandall's friends reveal their misdemeanors to him in the hope their confessions will shield them from Crandall's wrath. This is a corker of an episode, with Edward Judd proving yet again what a versatile actor he is in a tale of pure paranoia and vengeance. Directed by Peter Sasti, known for Hammer horror thrills such as one of my favourite Hammer films, Hands of the Ripper, and the foreboding Straight On Till Morning, you have the cream of the crop in British cult talent in one 60-minute hit. This, I find, maintains the viewer's interest as to whom is to be bumped off and the motive. People here place themselves under scrutiny, and it is sad to see Crandall ostracised by their own neurosis unnecessarily. Could they be the ones earmarked for assassination, or could it be something else that tests the limits of such betrayal and vehemence? You must watch this one. It's an absolute bloody corker. The tale that followed Time in Advance is pure whimsy, as Out of the Unknown was such a multifaceted series and wasn't all unadulterated pure science fiction. In this tale, Milo O'Shea stars alongside another carry-on star, the down-at-heel but cute Patsy Rowlands. I actually worked with someone who looked like her and had swollen legs, a little like a badly stuffed Guy Fawkes dummy you see wheeled about in November. This story was Come Buttercup, Come Daisy, Come, where a man's love for all things flora, bordering on obsession, leads him to create a hybrid with a ferocious appetite for all things fauna. Asimov's Sucker Bait, starring Bert Kwok, do you remember him from Tenko, is a story that sees an expedition to the planet Troas to investigate why a colony of 1,300 people have been wiped out. On board is a youth called Mark, who has been raised as a sort of supercomputer. Mark is revered by most of the crew at first, but may be the only member of the expedition who holds the clue as to why this tragic event occurred, and he also may be the only one with a solution to the problem that sees the members of the expedition dying one by one, as only Mark has a total omittance of regulation and a vigorous capability of reminiscence. The quandary Mark deals with, once he resolves the enigma, is uniquely Asimov, like those challenged by computers and robotics, things that know what is best for mankind, but must progress obliquely and find techniques misleading the protocol, stifling their plans. I told you it was cerebral. A good episode, nevertheless, but it requires a lot of focus. But if you focus on this episode, then basically you will get plenty of reward. The first casualty of the BBC's junking policy for this series was the Fox and the Forest by Ray Bradbury. And it starred Warren Mitchell, and it was set in Mexico, and it was about fugitives from a war-torn dystopian future who escape back in time to 1930s Mexico, where a few of Bradbury's shorter stories are set, and they're hunted down by agents sent to bring them back. The Fox and the Forest, also known as To the Future, was first published in the May 13th, 1950 edition of Collier's magazine. A regular theme of Bradbury's science fiction is lost humanism amongst an unsympathetic, methodological, and periodically bellicose future. Another casualty is Kate Wilhelm's Andover and the Android, which proved hugely successful on its first showing on BBC Two, so much so it received a repeat on its prime channel BBC One about a year later. In this story, Andover creates an android, as he won't inherit the family business unless he marries, so illegally he builds himself an android, as a thought of marrying and the constraints involved abhors him. At first, the android, Lydia, is the perfect ideal, a misogynist's wet dream, although I do question whether Andover would have preferred a male one. She is non-confrontational, does as she is told, the perfect representation of a 1960s housewife. As dear Bruce Forsyth and Barry Manilow once crooned, she's a great little housewife, but sometimes she talks like a fool. Sorry, viewer. However, Lydia's circuits break and she begins to malfunction, leading to a blackly comedic twist. Known and regarded by contemporaries at the time as the most outstanding of Season 1 stories, the loss of Andover and the Android from the BBC archives is as tragic as Andover's demise. Following on from Andover and the Android, we have the interesting but slightly jumbled Some Lapse in Time, written by John Brunner. He brings horrors of the past to the future, or is it the other way around, as a recurring nightmare manifests itself into one man's reality? I didn't see the twist here coming and found it to be very similar to Nigel Neal's style of scribing. I also saw similarities to the Aftermath, which was in BBC One's exercise in nuclear dread, Threads, which was made in 1984, which when I was a child absolutely petrified me. If you watch it, you will see what I mean, and I don't want to give too much away. Written at a time when people's fear of nuclear Armageddon and the Cold War at its peak lapses a thought-provoking piece and relevant to the time it was made. With a stellar cast and a young Peter Bowles as a copper, this production is worthwhile, albeit not the strongest in the series. This story was known to have the production design of none other than a young Ridley Scott, 14 years before receiving praise for his direction of the film Alien in 1979. J.G. Ballard's exemplary 13 to Centaurus came along after it, which has a Truman Show twist about the occupants destined to Alpha Centauri, encased in a spacecraft on a seemingly endless voyage to a new dawn of humanity. The crew themselves are oblivious to anything outside of their self-contained world and their self-sufficient realm. And they're also oblivious of anything to do with their earthly originations. Then one of the crew members, called Abel, begins to ask questions, leading to a shocking conclusion. Frederick Pohl brought his tale The Midas Plague to the series after this, which deals with consumerism, where what you consume governs your status in society, about a bit like these neon times we live in now, which is all well and good until someone wants a simpler life. A kind of social inversion, and one man's plight at trying to escape the drudgery of capitalist trappings. Out of the Unknown's first season drew to a close with this story to inordinate critical acclaim by armchair viewers and media critics alike, and so therefore this secured a second season. But as we shall see, the more the show progressed, sadly the less of it we can look, and look again. I was really hoping to condense all 4 seasons into a half-hour show, but I don't think this is feasible, of this marvellous series, but it deserves, I think, a 2-part status in our rounds of look, and look again. So in our next series, I will be looking at series 2, 3, and 4 for your delectation, with some of the best adaptations of science fiction ever to hit our screens. Until then, remember to keep watching the skies. Cheerio.
Come on, Harry. Right. Percy, you got a moment. Kenneth. Kenneth, get down. And you, George. Yes. George the second.
Sir, this is not whiskey and wine. I do not understand what all the fuss is about.
Jim, come here, Jim. Told you to keep watch. Well, keep watch. Hey, George? Good. You like me, George?
I love